introduce our next speaker, Dr. Guillaume Novilla. He holds an MSc in Bone and Joint Biology and a PhD in Bone and Biomaterial from University Paris Cité, France. He further honed his expertise through postdoctoral training at the prestigious NAPIS Department of Orthopedics, Hematology and Musculoskeletal Sciences at the University of Oxford, UK. From 2010 to 2012, he served as a senior scientist at Oxford before joining University of Angers, France in 2012 as an associate professor. In 2012 as a an associate professor in histology and embryology and a clinical consultant in bone pathology at Angers University Hospital. Since 2022, he has been leading a research group at INSERM UMRS 1229 Armens, where his work explores the fascinating interplay between gut hormones and bone health. His research focuses on how physiological gut hormones regulate bone remodeling, quality, and strength, with the goal of developing innovative gut hormones analogs to combat bone fragility disorders. Today's talk is about clinical bone metabolism and multi-scale biomechanics. Bone tissue is a remarkable structure engineered by nature from the macro to the nanoscale to withstand mechanical stress. However, even the slightest alteration at any of these levels can compromise its integrity, leading to increased fragility and fracture risk. At the heart of his research lies the development of groundbreaking tools to assess bone metrics quality with unprecedented precision. His team is internationally recognized for pioneering innovative techniques to analyze bone collagen and biomechanics at the nanoscale. Beyond diagnostic, they are also leading the way in designing a new generation of morphological treatment aimed at not only preserving but enhancing bone strength. By improving the quality of bone collagen, the approaches significantly boost bone resistance to fracture.
So thanks, Elam, for this kind introduction. So I hope that Jerome and Elam doesn't mind. I change a bit the title to put at least the clinician point of view on what is bone metabolism and how multi-scale biomechanics can impact actually bone strength. So what is bone tissue? So basically, bone tissue is what composes most of your skeleton. In the skeleton, you will have bone that is represented in here in yellow, and you have cartilage, which is represented in blue. And you can see what remains actually after death when we have the skeleton. It's mainly the bone tissue. So if we zoom in to the bone tissue, and especially the femur, we can see that there is two different types of bone. We have the cortical bone, which is at the periphery of the bone pieces, and we have the trabecular bone, which is at the extremity of the bone pieces. And the trabecular bone, it's really like a sponge. You have plenty of holes and trabecula, which compose like a ladder your skeleton. And the cortical bone, in the opposition to the trabecular one, it's really a compact and dense bone. And if we still zoom in, inside the trabecular bone, we will see that all the space that we have between the trabeculae are filled with cells. And these cells represent the bone marrow. So if we do histological assessment on a bone, on trabecular bone, you will find the trabeculae, which are dark pink with slight blue inside. And you have plenty of cells that fill actually the gap between the trabeculae. And these cells are not bone cells, but they are bone marrow cells. And you have really a link and a communication between bone cells, which are at the top of the trabeculae. In here, for example, we have osteoblasts, and bone marrow cells, which are in the close vicinity and will send signals to bone cells. Bone tissue will also adapt through all life, from birth, from childhood, and during growth, and after when you become elderly. And you need this adaptation of the bone to actually adapt to the different stress and strength that will be applied to the bone. So first adaptation is due to growth and change in position. And actually in the previous talk, we have seen in lumbar pain that the patients can bend a bit. So bone needs also to adapt to this bending and the way that forces will be applied actually to the bone. But bone is also the main reservoir for calcium and phosphate. And you need constant adaptation to maintain calcemia and phosphatemia, so the circulating level of calcium and phosphate in the blood. And you have plenty of hormones that will apply signals on bone cells to adapt the amount of calcium that you have in your skeleton, to release some store of calcium that has been in the skeleton, or in the opposition, to store calcium in the skeleton. So all this process of adaptation to growth or to metabolic stresses depends on a process that we call bone remodeling. And bone remodeling will adapt the bone not only in terms of quantity, but also in terms of 3D geometry and in terms of quality of the bone matrix. Bone remodeling, of course, is under different signals. It can be regulated by genetics. Depending on the mutation or variation in our genome, we can have impact on bone remodeling. We have also some nutritional factors that can impact actually the bone remodeling. If you are not eating enough protein, this is signals that will be sent to the bone to give actually resorption and to release some protein from the bone. If you are not taking enough calcium from your alimentation, again, some hormones will act on the skeleton to release the calcium that is stored inside the bone tissue. Bone remodeling is also under local factors, and especially factors from the bone marrow. If there is a problem in the bone marrow on hematological cancer, you will have automatically an impact on the bone tissue and hence on its strength. We will talk about it after, but mechanical factors are also strong stimulators of bone remodeling, and especially to reshape actually the way that the bone is organized. Metabolic factors also, and all the hormones from like PTH, like parathormone, all the hormones from the calcium and phosphate metabolism, but also hormones like GIP from the gut. You have a control of bone remodeling by your gut, and you have also some neuronal factors that can be released by the brain and can act directly locally on the bone to stimulate bone remodeling. You have, of course, some external factors that will also trigger bone remodeling, and especially alcohol and tobacco. And if you're an EV smoker, you're likely to have a high bone turnover, high bone remodeling, and a low bone mass. And of course, all these factors can be affected by aging, and aging will impact greatly bone remodeling, and especially in women after menopause. How is bone remodeling performed? It's performed by bone cells, and you have only 3 bone cells to remember. You have osteoclasts, which are the cells that are in the skeleton at the top of the bone tissue to resorb, to initiate degradation of the bone matrix. You have osteoblasts, that are the cells that will build the bone tissue and will remodel the bone tissue. And you have osteocytes that plays a role really of an orchestrator of all this system. Osteocytes will send signals to osteoclasts or to osteoblasts to induce resorption or bone formation. And if we zoom in on osteocytes, and we'll come back to this later, osteocytes are really histologically looking like neurons. It's a cells with a central body and plenty of dendrites that extend from it. And all these dendrites will circulate inside the bone marrow and inside the bone matrix to form a lacuno-canalicular system. So bone remodeling is mediated by cells. But is the quantity of bone that will be generated by bone remodeling steady during life, or is it adapted during life? These are the curves of your bone mineral density, which is a surrogate marker in clinics of your quantity of bone material. And you see that an individual will reach what we call a peak bone mass around 25 years old. After 25 years old, it will be only a decline of your quantity of bone material that is more pronounced in women just after the menopause, where there is a rapid loss of bone material. This is not really a huge problem as soon as you are not reaching this red square. The problem starts to appear when your quantity of bone is too low to sustain actually all the stresses that appear on the bone material. And this is what we can measure clinically with a densitometry or osteodensitometry, and we have a clinical score, which is called the T-score, that we will measure, and when you reach 2.5 standard deviation below the normal population, it's when you start to enter to this red zone, and that you're at risk of developing a bone fracture. But is the quantity of bone material the only parameter that affect bone strength? This is an old study that now has more than 20 years old, but we haven't really changed anything since, and we haven't learned really anything since. You can see that in blue you have the fractures that are explained by the amount, the quantity of bone that you have in an individual, and in red it's fractures which are unexplained by the amount of bone. And you can see that in both men and women, even if it's more pronounced in men, most of the fractures occur in patients that have a normal bone mineral density. So by performing osteodensitometry, we picked up only a small fraction of people that are at risk of developing a bone fracture. And of course, this is explained because your bone strength or your bone fragility depends on which way you interpret this diagram, is depending on 3 different factors. It depends, of course, on the quantity of your bone. If you have a really too low bone mass, you're at risk of fracture independently of the other factors. But it depends also on the way that your bone material is organized in 3 dimensions, which is called the microstructure. And it depends also on the material properties, on the quality of your elementary brick inside your bone matrix. If you have alteration of your collagen or alteration of the mineral, you're at risk, independently of the geometry and the quantity, of developing a bone fragility and a bone fracture. So the bone is organized in 4 different levels, from the nanoscopic scale to the macroscopic scale, to resist actually and to adapt to fracture, to strength. So the first level is the nature of the bone matrix. And in the bone matrix, we'll see it in a minute, we have a composite material made of collagen, which is the main proteins that we can find in it. It's 90% of all protein we can find in the bone matrix. And it's a composite because we have also minerals of calcium phosphate under the form of carbonated hydroxyapatite. And we need to have this dual composition to have all the properties that we need to resist to strength. Now, the collagen and the mineral will compact and will form what we call the texture of the bone. So both will compact to form lamella. You have on the top in here lamellar bone. And this lamellar structure is important also to resist to fracture. In pathological situation, you can have another organization of the texture, which is called woven bone or non-lamellar. And you can see in here by polarization that we don't find this pattern of dark and bright line in the bone. Next, the collagen and mineral lamella will compact and will form what we call the microarchitecture. And the microarchitecture is the geometry of the bone, the way that the bone material is organized in 3 dimensions. And we have a geometry which is slightly different depending that we are in trabecular bone or in cortical bone. And finally, the microarchitecture will compact to form the macroarchitecture, which is the angulation and the shape of the different bone pieces. And this also is important to resist to fracture. how can we investigate bone at these different scales? So if we want to just look at the characteristics of the biomechanics, if we're interested by the nature, we can apply some chemical or biochemical or structural tools like HPLC, so chromatography and mass spec. We can apply also some spectroscopy, vibrational spectroscopy like Raman or infrared. And we can also apply some quantitative backscattered electron imaging, like something like TEM that we have seen in the first talk this morning. If we're interested by biomechanics, we can do AFM or nanoindentation. And hence, at this scale, we are not at all affected by the geometry of the bone. We really look only at the matrix and the nature. If it's at the scale of the textures that we want to look at the bone characteristic, we can do TEM, electron microscopy, or to use polarized light microscopy to see if we have this pattern of bright and dark line. And again, in terms of biomechanics, we can perform nanoindentation or microindentation. If now it's at the level of the microarchitecture that we're interested, we can do micro-CT or microscopy in 2D. And we can apply finite element analysis or microtesting to measure the ground truth of biomechanics of the bone structure and to have an idea if there is a fragility or not. And finally, if it's at the macro architecture, we can use CT scan, MRI, or X-ray to determine the geometry and the shape of the bone pieces, and we can still apply FEA or loading test to have the ground truth and measure if there is a default in strength and response of the bone. So in terms of multi-scale organization, if we start by the nature of the bone is a composite material. You need to have a composite material to have all the mechanical properties to respond to the different stress that apply. You need to have the calcium phosphate under the form of hydroxyapatite to have the higher stiffness which is required to sustain gravity. I'm standing in front of you. I have the gravity compressing actually my body. I need to have the hydroxyapatite and a good degree of mineralization of my bone tissue to resist to the gravity. And at the same point, you can see that hydroxyapatite has a poor toughness, and we need to have this composite with collagen to greatly enhance the toughness of the bone and the deformity actually without fracture of the bone. And this is brought by the collagen moiety. 90% of all protein are type 1 collagen. Type 1 collagen is specifically orientated inside the matrix. It's making fibers, and fibers are aligned all according to certain properties and certain stress. And between the gap between fibers, it's where we will find the hydroxyapatite crystals. And by having this specific organization, it will bring the highest stiffness and the highest toughness that we require to have a strong bone. To have collagen, it's not the only thing that matters. You need also to have post-translational modification of type 1 collagen. And the major post-translational modification that you will have is bridging, linking, cross-linking between the different fibers. So this is made inside the cell, in the Golgi apparatus, where the different collagen fibers are formed, actually, and it's continued outside the cells, where specific enzymes, the lysyl oxidase, will act to make these specific bridges between the collagen fibers and the collagen molecules. Why this is important? It's important because in osteoporotic patients, so patients with a bone fragility, you have a reduction in this cross-linking, and hence they cannot really respond nicely to the stress that apply to their bone matrix. If you have a mutation in type 1 collagen and normal cross-linking, you are prone to develop another bone fragility disorder, which is called osteogenesis imperfecta. And OI is also called as a brittle bone disease. It's specifically seen in infants around the 2 to 3 years old. When they start actually to walk, they fall down and they will break their bone. And you see, it's not the classical fracture that we can see in osteoporosis, but it's really fracture in the middle of the femur, which is normally the place where you have only cortical bone, so a strong and compact bone. Of course, you can have also alteration of your degree of mineralization and mineralization properties of the bone matrix. And especially when you have a mutation in an enzyme which is required to initiate mineralization of your matrix, you develop another bone fragility disorder, which is called hypophosphatasia. And in hypophosphatasia, you have a normal amount of bone, a normal organization of the bone in 3 dimensions, but a poor bone material properties, and hence you fracture. So the nature, and especially post-translational modification of collagen and mutation in collagen or enzyme involved in mineralization, can lead to bone fragility. What happens now if we perturbate texture of the bone? So the collagen, or the collagen fibers, are deposited like a liquid crystal in the shape of a cholesteric form, and it will make that the collagen fibers are slightly orientated to each other. If we look by electron microscopy in the 2 different axes, so in here you have the structure and the model for the cholesteric liquid crystal of collagen fibers. And you see that if we cut the section alongside this plane, we will see theoretically this pattern of fibers. And indeed, when you do TM and that the collagen is cut in this pattern, you can see different alignment. You have in here collagen fibers which are cut longitudinally, and you have in here collagen fibers that are cut cross-sectionally. And if you take another axis for sectioning, and you take, for example, this axis, you will see this organization and this alternative structure, which is what you can see in TM in here. So we have this specific organization and deposition of the collagen fibrils with a small rotation between the different planes, something that resembles actually the organization of the shell of a snake. And this is important in the deposition of these collagen fibers to have a normal bone strength. When you have this pattern of organization, you will see actually by polarized light microscopy this type of structure, this polarization of the bone matrix with dark lane that correspond to the fibers which are cut cross-sectionally, and bright lanes that correspond to the fibers that are cut longitudinally. This is a perfect resistance to fracture. If now you have a problem in the deposition of your collagen and the rotation between the different planes, and you don't have a cholesteric crystal liquid form, you will have this type of structure, which is called a woven bone. And woven bone is what you will observe in cases that your bone needs to grow very, very fast. So we can see it early in life, and it will remodel into lamellar bone, but we can see it also in pathological disorders like metastasis or Paget's disease of the bone. This cholesteric structure is also important for the pattern of mineralization of your bone matrix. And if we look at, by QBI, by electron imaging, at the amount of mineral that is incorporated into the bone matrix, so in here we're in cortical bone, where we have what we call an osteum, which is a compact structure of the bone, like a column of bone matrix, and that we look at the arrangement and the degree of mineralization of the different structure, you will see this difference with zones which are highly mineralized, which appear quite red, and zones which are low in mineralization degrees that appear more greenish. And this pattern is also important to countercare actually the development of microcracks inside the bone and to propagate this microcrack into a stairway shape. And you can see in here, if we had a material that was uniform, the cracks will propagate quite massively in one direction. By alternating this pattern with zone of high mineralization and low mineralization, we can make really like stairway. And it's exactly similar to what will happen in a fracture of a brick wall. If you have compressive strength actually that apply to the wall, you will have this stairway cracks. So this is another adaptation of the bone to resist actually to fracture. And when you don't have this organization into lamellar bone, you are prone to develop bone fragility, and it's exactly what is seen in bone metastasis, where you can even have more bone material, but a material that is not organized with a texture that it should have and doesn't resist to fracture and to the different stress. Doesn't resist to the stress, and you get fracture. It's exactly also what you can see in skeletal dysplasia, where you have an abnormal deposition of the bone. So in here again, it's not a problem of low bone density, but it's really a problem of poor quality of the bone, and you get fracture. And it's also what you get in Paget's disease of the bone. So the texture is really important to have the maximum resistance to fracture. The different collagen lamella will compact and will create the microarchitecture that we can find inside the bone. So all the different lamella will compact to form osteon in cortical bone, or will compact to form trabeculae in trabecular bone. And each osteon and each trabeculae are the functional unit of the bone. An osteon or a trabeculae is independent of the other trabeculae or osteon. And it's what we call the basic structural unit. In terms of structure, and it's what we consider as the geometry of the bone, you have the osteons that can be seen like columns of dense compact bone, which are there usually alongside the stress line. And you have trabeculae, which is more like a scaffold to limit actually the collapsing of the cortical bone. This is what we evaluate actually in clinics when we perform a bone biopsy or where we look at peripheral quantitative CT scan. And you can see if we reconstruct in 3 dimensions the biopsy, that in osteoporosis, we don't have the same organization of trabeculae than in a normal bone. And of course, we can apply some mechanical testing and especially compression load on this type of biopsy core, and we can measure the strength which is required to break actually the bone. Finite element analysis can also be performed on this 3D model, but we'll come back in the next slide on finite element analysis, because there is a major limitation when this is done, is that it's never taken into action the impact of the material properties of the bone. We always do finite element analysis only on the geometry, the structure of the bone. But we never look at the texture, or we don't implement in the model the texture of the bone, and we don't implement in the model the quality of the collagen or the hydroxyapatite mineral. And next, osteon and trabecula will form the bone pieces and the macro architecture, and it's mainly a factor of shape and angulation to resist actually to the mechanical stress. This needs to adapt through the growth and the life, and especially in the elderly when they will start to have more bending than young individuals, we will change, for example, the angulation of the femoral neck. It can be seen also in hip dysplasia, where it can lead to luxation, osteoarthritis, but also to fracture. An optimal angulation for the femoral neck is around 130 degrees, and you can have an extensive angulation, which is called the coxa vara, or a reduction into this angle, which is called the coxa valga. And if we make a finite element analysis on this shape of the bone, and especially when we transform our normal bone into a coxa valga, we will see that it's easier actually to break the bone, or at least to estimate the force which is required to break the bone. Here again, the limitation of this FEA challenge or method is that we don't take into account the quality of the bone matrix and the texture of the bone matrix. So we have seen that there is 4 different levels of organization of the bone: the nature, the texture, the microarchitecture, and the macroarchitecture. But is bone deposition following some rules? And there is this pioneering work from Julius Wolff since 1869, so you see more than a century ago, that actually look at the stress line that apply to a crane. And you have in here a Fairbairn crane, which is on the Bristol port in UK. And if you look by engineering at where the maximum stresses will apply, you will get these specific lines. If now we look what happens to a bone, and especially a femoral neck, and it's what Julius Wolff did, he calculated actually where the maximum force would apply, and you get this specific pattern of stress line. And if we make an histological section of a femoral neck, you can see that the trabeculae that you have inside your bone seems to perfectly match with the stress line that you can predict. And indeed, the quantity of bone, the bone mass, and the way that the bone will be organized in 3 dimensions is organized according to the stress line. It's just not random. The trabeculae will be really organized according to the stress line. So now we need something in the bone to sense the different stress. And this is a work of Harald Frost, almost 60 years ago, who actually describes the mechanostat theory and the Utah paradigms, where he postulated that mechanical loading needs to be sensed by something inside the bone, that this stuff in the bone will induce a biological response, and this biological response will adapt through bone remodeling the way that the bone will be deposited and organized. There is further evidence of this mechanostat theory, and the first one, it's if you remove the mechanical stress that is applied by muscle to the bone. So for this, you can just inject Botox, botulinum toxin, inside, for example, the quadriceps. So you will have a flake, actually muscle, incapable of stimulating mechanically the bone, incapable of contracting. And when you do that, and it's exactly what you have in here, you can see that you will reduce the amount of trabeculae inside the bone in Botox-injected animals. If now we look at the bone resistance of Botox, so you have in green the normal bone, in red bone resulting from injection of Botox into the muscle, and you see that the ultimate load that you get, it's far lower in Botox-injected animals than in sham animals. If we look now, like in this image of micro-CT, how the trabecular bone, the quantity of trabecular bone is inside the bone, inside the femur, we can see that we have a reduction in the amount of trabecular bone. And if we look at the nature of the bone, we can see that there is also a repercussion in terms of cross-linking of the collagen matrix. So when you perturbate actually the way that bone will sense mechanical forces, you don't impact only the bone quality, but you impact the bone quantity, but you impact also the way that the bone is organized in 3 dimensions and the nature of the bone, and especially post-translational modification of the collagen. So what are the cells which are responsible to sense and respond to mechanical forces? The cells which are doing that are the osteocytes. So we said earlier in this talk that osteocytes are cells which are embedded into the bone matrix and will orchestrate actually bone remodeling. And it's cells which have a specific modification of their membrane to sense the different forces, to transduce these forces inside the skeleton of this osteocyte, and to induce a response by gene expression and organization and adaptation of the bone. you can see in here with the specific histological staining the way that osteocytes are organized inside an osteon. So you have in here a central channel that you have in osteon, and you can find in here the cell body of osteocyte and the different dendrites that connect to each other and propagate inside the bone matrix. So if we try to schematize actually the organization and the way that bone or cells are organized inside the bone matrix, so you have in here the osteoclasts, which are the cells responsible for chewing the bone. You have in here osteoblasts, which are the cells responsible for building basic structural unit. And you have osteocytes. And osteocytes are cells which are embedded directly inside the bone matrix. And by their dendrites, they communicate with each other. They communicate with osteoblasts. They can release products from their dendrite close to osteoclast, and they communicate also with blood vessels. This means that if you start a perturbation of one osteocyte inside the bone matrix, the information will propagate into all this network of osteocytes. So if we zoom in on an osteocyte, we can see that there is different modification at the plasma membrane. There is specific proteins which are there to induce a cell-to-cell communication. We have proteins which are there to anchor actually the osteocyte with the bone matrix protein. You have ion channels, which are in dark in here, that are sensitive and can open actually when mechanical forces apply to the plasma membrane. And we have, like we heard in the first lecture this morning, caveolae. How do we measure how osteocytes will respond actually to stress? So it's this type of experiment that can be done in vitro with cell culture. You can just put osteocyte into a glass plate, insert this plate into the specific dispositif where you can induce a fluid flow inside the gasket, and you can control the stress which is applied to osteocyte through this formula, where you can adjust it with the volumetric flow rate that you will induce into the system and the width and height of the gasket. Just to emphasize on the role that can have matrix anchoring protein on the osteocyte network, so if we do this type of experiment and we induce by siRNA knockout of specific integrins, which are the proteins that will anchor the osteocyte membrane to extracellular matrix. If we knock out the beta-1 or beta-3 integrins, you see that osteocytes are no longer capable to respond to dynamic fluid flow. If we do the same by knocking down with siRNA the cell-to-cell junction by inhibiting connexin 43, here again, osteocytes are no longer capable to respond to dynamic flow. And finally, if we knock down TRPV4, which is an ion channel sensitive to mechanical stress, osteocytes still cannot respond to dynamic flow. So it's really the three things, ion channel, cell-to-cell junction, and matrix anchoring protein, that will sense mechanical forces and will induce, through the cytoskeleton of osteocyte, a response up to the nucleus. So osteocytes can control actually the way that osteoblast and osteoclast will work, especially by inducing bone remodeling. And the different mediators that will be released by osteocytes will be different depending that you have a mechanical stimulation or that there is no mechanical stimulation. In a normal skeleton, osteocytes are subjected to mechanical stress, so they will secrete a protein in response to this mechanical stress, which is called Wnt3a, that will stimulate osteoblasts to build bone. And they will secrete Wnt3a until they cannot sense actually mechanical forces. And in response, osteoblast will build the bone, and you have a bone which is stronger and can absorb more forces. Osteocyte can also induce bone remodeling by themselves all around their dendrite and lacunae, and to adapt locally the bone material properties. And usually what they do is that they induce the degree of mineralization of the matrix, and they increase the amount of cross-linking of the collagen until they cannot sense anymore these mechanical forces. In a situation where there is no mechanical forces, osteocyte will secrete other mediators like sclerostin, and sclerostin is an inhibitor of osteoblast. So when sclerostin is secreted, osteoblast cannot anymore make bone formation. Osteocyte will also reduce the amount of modification of the material properties, and they will stimulate resorption by osteoclast through the secretion of Frank ligand. Like that, osteoclast will remove a small quantum of bone, and hence osteocyte can sense again mechanical forces. So it's really a dynamic process to be able to find the good balance between enough mechanical forces, not enough mechanical forces, sensed by osteocyte. And of course, osteocyte can induce by themselves also, around their dendrite and cell body, bone resorption. And you have really this dynamic cycle which is put in place to adapt to mechanical cues. So if we moved a bit from the cell biology through the clinic and how we manage actually bone fragility and how drugs which are used to manage bone fragility are effective at the different scale, osteoporosis, which is a major bone fragility disorder, is quite common, and especially in our population which are aging. It will affect 1 out of 3 women after the age of 50 and 1 out of 5 men after the age of 50. And it's not only that you suffer of a low bone mass, which is often described as osteoporosis, it's 1 out of 3 women and 1 out of 5 men will develop a fragility fracture after 50 years old. So you see it's quite something common. And why it's important? Because fragility fracture has a huge healthcare cost. It's more each year spent by the European Union on osteoporotic fracture than on breast and prostate cancer together. So it's really a huge impact on the health system. And what you have to bear in mind, we always see osteoporosis as just a fracture, and you can think, well, I had a fracture when I was a child. It's not so dramatic. For 2 months, I cannot do my activities, my normal activities, but that's all. No, when it happens to elderly, it's really a complex problem, and almost 25% of patients with a femoral neck fracture after 65 years old won't survive 1 year. So 25% of patients will die after a hip fracture. And 60% of the patients that will have any osteoporotic fracture will require assistance a year after their fracture. Even if the fracture actually stabilizes and they rebuild bones, there is no sign of the fracture, there is a loss of independency. So we need really for all these causes to better diagnose and predict who will be at risk of developing a fracture, and especially a femoral neck fracture, and who is not. And today, the clinical path that we have is to perform DEXA scan to assess as a surrogate marker the amount of bone that you have in your body, but we have seen earlier that DEXA scan and BMD, bone mineral density, it's not perfect because it catches up only a small amount of people with fracture, but it's the best that we have in the clinic for the moment. From the DEXA scan, we will use an algorithm which is called FRA-X that will calculate probability, a score for the patients to develop a fracture. And based on this score, we will decide to put an anti-osteoporotic drug. And the type of drugs that we'll use depends actually on 2 big categories today. It depends on anti-resorptive drugs, with bisphosphonate like zoledronic acid or risedronate being the most used molecule, and on anabolic drugs that are there to stimulate bone formation, with teriparatide, which is quite effective, and romosozumab, which is the newest actually molecule in the anti-osteoporotic arsenal. But both strategies, anti-resorptive drugs and anabolic, will only target the quantity of bone material. And they target only the quantity of bone material because clinically, we only assess this parameter through DEXA scan, at least non-invasively. And this is really a problem, actually, in the care of our osteoporotic patients, because if you look at the axial skeleton, so the lumbar spine, bone mineral density will be increased with the newest molecule by almost 12%, and this will lead to a reduction of almost 70% of fracture. So in the lumbar spine and axial skeleton, measuring DEXA, measuring the quantity of bone by DEXA, is effective and it's working quite well, we can say. The problem arises on the appendicular skeleton, and especially the femur, because by increasing the bone mineral density, already you can see that bone mineral density cannot be increased at the same level than in the lumbar spine by the same molecule. And by increasing the quantity of bone, you reduce only by 20-25% the risk of developing a fracture. So 75% of patients taken these anti-osteoporotic drugs will still have a second episode of osteoporotic fracture. We said earlier on that bone material properties are important to have bone strength, and especially osteoporotic patients has a lower bone material property, and especially collagen cross-linking. And the problem is that all these drugs, bisphosphonate or anabolic drugs, will reduce even further the quality of the bone matrix. And you can see in here on the low amount of data that we have in the literature, which have been made through bone biopsies, that bisphosphonates are quite neutral on the cross-linking of the collagen matrix. So despite you have a low effect on bone mineral density, you have no effect on bone material properties, and hence you are still not capable of restoring a normal bone material property. And teriparatide and all anabolic agents is even more worrying because it will reduce even further the cross-linking which is compromised in osteoporosis. So you increase on one side the amount of the quantity of bone, but you reduce even further the quality of the bone matrix. And it's for that we need really, and there is a space for new molecules that will target directly bone material properties to see if they would be actually better than the actual therapies to reduce fracture in the patients at risk of developing a bone fracture. So one of these molecules, which is developed by a startup called Colatera, is KOL17091, which is only for the moment at the preclinical stage, but targets specifically the cross-linking of the bone matrix. You can see in here the way that collagen cross-linking is investigated. Usually it's done through infrared spectroscopy, where we can measure specific determinants of cross-linking. In osteoporosis, so OVX, it's an animal model where we surgically remove the ovaries. So it reproduces in the animal the consequence of menopause. This animal will develop actually a bone fragility. And when we look at the bone fragility, it's similar to what you can have actually in postmenopausal women. So if we look at the amount of collagen maturity, you can see that we're quite low in the OVX animals treated with a placebo. If we put bisphosphonate, we don't do much on the collagen maturity. But if we put KOL17091, we increase greatly, actually, the collagen maturity. And if we quantify it, we increase by 12% the quality of the collagen matrix. And when we do that, it's enough, actually, to increase mechanical resistance of the bone, and especially to increase bending strength and the toughness of the bone with the plastic deformation and the energy which is required to break actually the bone matrix. And we're doing this with KOL in a much better way than with zoledronic acid, which is the most often used molecule today in the anti-osteoporotic arsenal. Another disease that can benefit from KOL17091 and of targeting of the bone material properties is osteogenesis imperfecta. We said earlier on that osteogenesis imperfecta is a disease actually which is due to mutation often in the different chains that compose the type 1 collagen. OI patients are characterized by a short stature and very, very fragile bone. It's what we call the brittle bone disease, and one of the symptoms, it's when you take your child in your arms and you break their ribs. So this is often in OI and in the most severe form. And because the collagen is abnormally deposited in the bone matrix, you have also problem of hearing. There is hearing loss. And the type 1 collagen is the most often protein found in bone, but not only in bone. And this explains why you have dentinogenesis imperfecta, which is a problem of the dentin inside the tooth. Blue sclera, because the cornea and the sclera of your eyes contain actually type 1 collagen, and you can have muscle weakness, cardiac valve abnormalities, and pulmonary impairment. It's not possible in OI to use gene therapy because today there is more than 25 genes which are related to OI with more than 3,000 variants associated with the disease. So you imagine if you wanted to do gene therapy, you will need to have 3,900 different molecules to actually address each type of OI. And today, there is no approved pharmacological treatment for this disease. So currently, what is done in OI is to do surgery to correct the bone fracture and the deformities of the bone. And it was some clinical trial using bisphosphonate in OI, showing that bisphosphonate can increase the bone material density, the amount of bone, which is normal because it's a job of a bisphosphonate, but with no sign of reduction in the number of fractures that the children could do. And even more dramatic, the children which were treated at an early age with bisphosphonate were more prone to develop fracture in the adulthood than children treated with a placebo. So OI can be replicated in the animal by doing a mutation in the type 1 collagen. And you can see that when you do this mutation, we have a dramatic reduction in the collagen cross-linking that is not actually reversed by administration of zoledronic acid. KOL 17091, this molecule specifically targeting the collagen cross-linking, can enhance actually collagen cross-linking in levels which are similar to what you can have in wild-type animals. And if we look at the bone strength of bones of OI animals treated with either a placebo or KOL, you can see that you increase actually almost every mechanical parameters. And more impressive, it's if we directly measure the amount of fractures that these animals can do, because these animals with OI, they do spontaneous fracture. Just by their daily activity in the cage, they can fracture their femur and humerus. And if we quantify the number of new fractures under treatment, by targeting the bone material properties, we can directly reduce by 92% the occurrence of new fracture. Just to give you an idea, romosozumab, which is the anabolic treatment, the newest anabolic treatment, which is currently developed also for OI, is reducing by 50% fracture. So by addressing the quantity of bone material, we can reduce by 50% the occurrence of fracture. By addressing perturbation of the nature of the bone material properties, we can reduce by almost 90% the fracture. So it's much more effective therapy than accessing directly the quantity of bone. So in terms of take-home message, so I hope I convince you today that bone is a living tissue through the bone remodeling process, which is managed by osteocytes that will send signals either to osteoblast to build bone or osteoclast to resorb bone. That the bone will adapt constantly to various stresses like mechanical stresses, but also metabolic and growth. That we have this specific multi-scale organization of the bone matrix, and this specific multi-scale is required to have the best resistance to stress and fracture, and that we need to integrate actually the bone material properties either to develop new molecules for the treatment of bone fragility or even to reduce the limitation of analytical model like FEA. And I wanted to finish by actually doing some acknowledgement to people in my team that have been involved in most of the study and the development of COEL 17091 with Mallory Couchot and Benoît Gaubron, and the different collaborations that we have on this type of molecule. And I will be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much for your nice presentation. Do we have any questions?
Hello, and thank you for your comprehensive presentation. I wanted to find which slide was that, but I guess you already know it. You showed a test, experimental test you have done on a. I want to ask the size of the test, and was that?
You mean this one directly on the biopsy?
Yeah, I guess I remember the.
So yeah. So the biopsy diameter actually that we have in here, it's usually 8 millimeter in diameter.
And the specimen was human or?
Yeah. This is what we do when there is a suspicion, actually, when a patient arrives to the clinic with a fracture, and that the DEXA scan cannot pick up any difference in the quantity of the bone material. A biopsy will be done to the patient to understand why he has this bone fragility.
And also you have showed another test. The title of the slide is how astrocyte sense mechanical cues.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about that test? And
so it's fluid flow. This one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's fluid flow. So usually you plate osteocyte on a glass plate, like you do normally for cell culture. Mm-hmm. And you will mount actually your cover slips, your glass cover slip, into this dispositive where you have in here two tubings. The first one on the left will be for cell culture medium to enter into the system. Mm-hmm. And the second one will be to remove the liquid from the system. So like that, you create a fluid flow shear stress on the cells, and you can simulate actually a mechanical response.
Yeah, exactly. It was very interesting. And can you re-mention the dimension of this?
Of the gasket that we have in here?
Yeah.
Usually, well, you can adapt it to the amount of force that you want to apply actually to the cell. But usually what we use in 8, it's 1 millimeter, from 1 to 1.5 millimeter. And in width, it's going from 7 millimeter to 12 millimeter.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's somehow it is called macro in
macro
dimension. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Apart from the drug treatment options that you presented, there is an approach that applies therapeutic vibration to the osteopenic tissues to mimic effects of mechanical loading induced during exercise. What do you think about this approach? How effective is it?
Well, what is sure is that by stimulating mechanically the bone, it's a good thing. And it's what, anyway, we recommend as a first-line treatment to our patients. It's at least to do 1 hour of mechanical stimulation by walking or doing exterior activities to mechanically stimulate their skeleton. The problem is that often mechanical stimulation, it's not enough to reduce the risk of fracture. And it's for that we need to apply actually a pharmacological treatment.
Yeah, so the vibration is not an alternative?
It's not, well, the vibration will work, and it's what we have from the clinical studies on the calcaneum, for example. So the bone which are close to the platform where you will do actually mechanical stimulation. But if we look no further, like the femoral neck fracture, mechanical stimulation like vibration won't have really an impact on the fracture risk.
I have like a more general question. You were saying in the slide that 25% of the people die within 1 year
Yeah.
after hip fracture. Is it like a direct caused by the hip fracture, or?
Well, it can be a direct cause because when it applies really to an elderly that live alone at home, it might take some time to actually see that the patient fell down and break its femur, because usually it cannot stand up on its own when it's like that. And also because the patients that will have a femoral neck fracture are always patients with multiple comorbidities, and usually with hypertension, diabetes, or metabolic syndrome. And basically, by losing their independence, they need to be placed for 3 to 6 months to recover from their femoral neck fracture. Usually, they get like depressive syndromes. They stop to care to themselves. They stop to take actually their different medication, and they die. It's not that 25% of people will die directly from a femoral neck fracture. It's just that 25 won't survive 1 year after a femoral neck fracture.
So it's more because of the impact on the general life.
Yeah.
Thank you for nice talk. My question is about the cell type communication. You said that osteocytes communicate with osteoblasts by just this Wnt signaling pathway, right?
Yeah. I mean, Wnt signaling pathway to positively affect osteoblasts, and sclerostin to negatively impact osteoblast function.
Yeah, my question is exactly how could this be, affected by the magnitude or frequency of the mechanical stimuli that you are applying?
Well, the amount of it's a really interesting question. The amount of Wnt3a that will be secreted by osteocytes is proportional to the amount of mechanical stimulation that the osteocyte can sense. So the more mechanical stimulation, the more Wnt3a will be secreted. And it's exactly the opposite relationship for sclerostin. The more mechanical stimulation, the lower sclerostin secretion. But you have to see it as a dynamic process, because the more mechanical stimulation that the osteocyte can sense means that there is a low amount of bone material or a poor bone material quality. So as soon as they secrete an important amount of Wnt3a and they can remodel the cross-linking of the collagen matrix, but within minutes they have done that, osteoblasts start to build some bone. So the mechanical sensing for the same mechanical force will be reduced, and they will reduce the amount of Wnt3a, and so on, until they cannot sense anymore the mechanical forces.
Oh, yeah, thank you. The same for the ion channels.
Yeah.
You have mentioned this TRPV4, which is highly mechanically, affected. So how is it behave? When you have high mechanical loading,
yeah.
So this channel is gonna be open, and the flow of calcium ion.
It's a calcium channel. So actually, when you apply mechanical forces to the osteocyte plasma membrane, it will stretch the membrane. The channel will open, and calcium will enter. And calcium will act as a secondary messenger inside the cytoplasm of the osteocyte to induce a cascade of events that will transduce the opening at the plasma membrane of the channel to the nucleus to induce the expression of Wnt3a and reduce sclerostin.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So we're a bit late. I will just have a question, because some people here are taking a hands-on on bone modeling, bone quality, and then fracture prediction. So when you measure then these alterations, the lateral aggregation of the collagen, and then these nanoscale mechanical weakness. So I understand that it also happens in osteoporosis. You don't need to go into osteogenesis imperfecta. And is the alteration reproducible, or is that something that is relatively random from patient to patient because of epigenetic effects? Or
No, I mean, well, it depends which type of osteoporosis, because osteoporosis is just an umbrella term for multiple disease of bone fragility syndrome. But if we take postmenopausal osteoporosis that we can reproduce with ovariectomy into the animal, we have exactly the same magnitude of difference in collagen cross-linking at the nanoscale in the animal versus what we can see in postmenopausal women.
I have a short question. I know that we have a limit time, but that would be great if you could help me in this direction. So, okay. If I understood correctly, it was very nice to see that the effect of osteoporosis at nano level, because the effect in structure at nano level, but by reducing the number of cross-linking.
Yeah.
And at macro level is clear. So we have the density will change, and so
the density will change. The way that trabecular organized will change, and the elementary bricks of the bone matrix will be changed.
Okay. But my question is at a micro level or a texture level in your slides. You showed, it was very nice, that collagen fibril has a different direction
Yeah.
at micro level.
Yeah.
So it's not unidirection. And this change in collagen fibril at a structure level is really important. The amount of bone that can sustain in pressure or in tension. So in the available study, is there any study that shows that the effect of osteoporosis at the collagen fibril structure or pattern in this direction?
No. Actually, in osteoporosis, the texture of the bone is normal. So you have this lamellar organization.
Okay.
It's modification of texture. It's usually seen in
age? So by age?
not so much in age. It's seen in condition where osteoblast needs to work really fast. So you will have it in metastasis. You will have it in bone fracture callus. And you will have it also in rare bone disorder like Paget's disease of the bone or fibrous dysplasia because of an abnormality in a specific gene, which is involved in the organization of the lamellar bone.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, so I think it's time then to close the morning. Thank you, Guillaume.